Hi, I'm Gary Kim with PTC TV. I'm here today with Bill Barney, the CEO of Reliance Communications, which, as most of you know or should know, is an entity owned by one of the largest companies in the world, certainly one of the largest in India. You have a portfolio now that covers enterprise, mobile, undersea. Let's start with undersea.
Yeah.
Tell me what you see happening in the coming year in terms of bandwidth and bandwidth demand, and what's driving it, and where it is, and where it has to go.
Well, I think we're at an interesting period. In the last 12 months, we've seen built and announced 5 cables by new players from the industry, OTT players versus traditional telco operators, and I think that's really showing you what's happening on the what I would call the proprietary demand side of these companies. So Microsoft, Google, these companies now are really having to build their own infrastructure, which really shows you, I think, that we're in that second coming of data. And it's interesting, I think networks are now changing from where they used to be pointing at internet locations to where they're pointing to cloud locations. And so it's not only these companies are coming with their internet infrastructure, but they're also coming with their cloud infrastructure, and the importance of actually having access to those cloud points are very, very important. And I think that's going to be the next stage in where cables are built and how it actually gets built around the world. So
the global architecture has become a cloud architecture at its core.
Yeah, and I think it's largely because enterprises have put most of their compute into the cloud. And so that's really changed. It used to be a US-centric model. I think it's going to be a cloud-centric model, and it's going to be a data center-centric model where large data centers or large locations where cloud has been enabled and that infrastructure sits either for storage or for compute are going to be where networks are going to point towards, as opposed to necessarily pointing into PAX and Hudson Street and some of the key locations in the United States. I think it's going to change, and it's going to be an evolution, but it will happen over the next couple of years.
I'm hearing a lot about SD-WAN this year. Why am I hearing that?
Well, I think it's the first technology that really allows you to provide wide area network services into the emerging markets. And markets that were difficult to get to, now you've got a solution. It's seamless to the customer. You can go in there and you can essentially offer them the experience that they could have in a developed market, in an emerging market. And the technology is pretty easy to manage. And I think this is one of the outputs of cloud computing, is that you really have content delivery type networks that are being built inside these networks that now allow you to deploy this types of speeds over what used to be the public internet, right? So we're in a good space right now in terms of the opportunity which SD-WAN, and I think this is going to be a lot of advancement in the next 2 years. I think you're going to hear a lot about this over the next 24 months.
You've been talking a lot about mobile, which I've not heard you talk about in the past, partly because you're in charge of it now.
Yeah.
What do you see happening in mobile? How does that relate to fixed line? What's the interplay?
Well, I think let's go back 15 years to when we were largely in a voice market, and we went to an internet market or a data market in the fixed line space. That's happening in mobile, and I think this is really going to change how mobile operators look at their businesses. I think we're going to change from a minutes business to a megabits business, and that's going to mean a totally different network than's been put in place. Microwaves will leave, fiber will arrive. Spectrum is going to have to be managed very, very carefully, and also how you actually, most of the large data providers in the mobile space are also going to be data center operators. The one thing I've seen in India is, with the explosion that they've had in the data market in the last 4 or 5 months, there's also been an explosion in the data center market. So if you look at the number of racks consumed, has almost doubled, okay, in the last 4 months. So as you have, there's an ecosystem here that plays all the way down through the supply chain. And I think that's going to be the interesting thing that happens, is that a traditional wireless company didn't really think of themselves as having to be a content manager, and they now have to be in that business, and they never had to be in that business before. So it's a very interesting time right now for these operators.
So it's really content now becoming the thing that drives global bandwidth, data centers, where you need to go,
Yep.
how you get there, what you need when you get there.
Because you and I communicate with each other in the mobile space now in a very different way.
Yeah.
We're using a social network, we're sharing photos, we're sharing videos, we're actually trying to talk to each other, and we're moving large packets between each other, as opposed to picking up the phone and calling each other. And it's good and bad. And in some ways, it's good in that it's not real time all the time. You can move stuff at will, and there's different types of traffic engineering that can be played. But it is requiring much bigger networks and much more sophisticated networks and much more capital intensive networks. So the interesting thing is, it used to be spectrum was your biggest cost. It's no longer. Now you got all this other infrastructure that you got to worry about. And a lot of the marketing guys that are actually running these wireless telcos have now got a whole new world they got to learn about. And it's interesting. They're almost becoming cable TV operators at the same time they're telco guys. And it's really creating an interesting world that everyone's going to have to sort of adapt to in that space. And it's interesting to watch. I'm actually in India, where it's an emerging market. You've got a new entrant that's come in, offered essentially free services for 4 months, and they've taken 50 million subscribers in 80 days. Fantastic growth, but it also has had an impact on the other 500 million subscribers that are out there that are data users, and how they actually access their networks. And I think that's changed how, in my mind, it's a bellwether of what will happen everywhere else in the world as you start to see 4G, LTE start to become just native technologies in these locations.
So you're a person who's been in the industry since 2000, 2001. You know about free capacity and what that does to a market. What would you expect to see in India and then elsewhere around the planet as this sort of thing happens?
Well, I think there's a correction that'll happen, right? So there's going to be, and what happens on these corrections are, unfortunately, sometimes there's restructurings that happen. There's consolidation. Typically, there'll be a lot of companies coming together because they have to, because it's still a capital-intensive industry, and if you look at the cost, the amount of capital per user, is tripling when you go from the voice to the data business. And in order to manage that, you actually have to have a much more consolidated industry everywhere. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to see, is there will be massive consolidation. And unfortunately, free markets like India, it has to happen by people getting together. Whereas in other markets, you can essentially, the government mandates these things. So I think, but it will happen. So we're going to see a lot of mergers and acquisitions. I think we're going to see a lot of stress as well. There'll be a lot of stress in the market for the next 2 years. So it'll be growth, but not necessarily healthy growth. It's going to be hard growth.
Seen this before.
Yeah, I think we're going to be. It's going to be an interesting period for us. I think in all of us in the industry, it'll be good and bad. But I think we'll come out the door in a positive place in 2 to 3 years. But I think this is going to be 24 months of fasten your seatbelts and enjoy the ride, and hopefully manage appropriately through it.
Bill, thanks very
Gary.
much. Fascinating as always.
Yeah, good to see you.
And thanks for watching.